he would go into the office every day up into his late 90s. He enjoyed working, and the latter part of his life, once he had amassed all of this that he had earned throughout his lifetime, he felt like, I need to give this back. He's a good Catholic, right? That's what we do. We give back to community and in either time or treasure or talents, whatever.
Right.
We give back, and he had the money to do it.
The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the producer and not necessarily those of WKTV Community Media.
Hello, West Michigan. This is Grand Tap Media Business TV. My name is Pamela Keim, your host. The spirit of the show is to introduce West Michigan to all the businesses, nonprofit, individuals that can help us thrive in our lives. And today's guest is very special. And I know I say that on most times, but I do have a very special guest today because his family have a legacy in our country. And his grandfather was instrumental in saving thousands of lives in World War II. And he did something so cool that he became a hero. I don't know if he even knew that was going to happen. Comes back from West Michigan, and he brings back something that we all have, probably maybe you moms have on the bottom of your car, or maybe in your church or in your diaper bag, that made his family famous. But his grandfather did so many heroic things, and I am going to let his grandson tell more about that because he is successful in his own. He is an advisor for seniors. He helps seniors, families navigate through that system, which is huge today. Many of us are now caregivers for our parents, our aunts, our uncles, maybe even our neighbors. We're bringing food to, trying to get them from A to B to the doctor's appointments, and we find it very overwhelming and we don't know where to go. So he started a company, and also he is on the advisory boards of seniors, and his family has been a philanthropist in our state. And since meeting his grandson, Brian Hauenstein, that I found out from other people I was going to share with you, that how instrumental your grandfather was to their endeavors. But I want to welcome Brian to the show, and he is going to share his family legacy, and he is going to share his business that is going to possibly help many of you navigate through the senior, I guess, community, right?
That's right.
Thank you, Brian,
Thank you, Pamela.
for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I want you to share, who are you? And I want you to give a little bit of a synopsis of your grandfather,
Sure.
What impact he had on World War II that we are still safe today in our country due to some of the action. And I don't even think he realizes the impact he had on us.
I think maybe he did, but many in the community certainly don't.
Well, okay. Well, maybe he did when he was doing it, but I think sometimes when you become what your grandfather experienced, being from the Midwest, like he used to call.
He was modest about it.
He was modest, but I think a lot of people think that we have lived sheltered lives.
Yes.
And then you go over there and you really see horror.
Yeah.
And he did go into Dachau and saw that that horrible situation. And I will just share that one. When I saw the story of you talking about when your dad shook the hand of one of the Jews that were in the camp, went up to your dad when he walked in there.
Grandfather. Sorry.
God. Okay, wait. Let me write that down.
This is a common mistake that people make because my grandfather lived to almost 104, passed away in 2016, and looked like he was about 80. Okay. So it's a common mistake that people think he was my father. My dad's name was Ralph also.
Also when I was talking about your dad, real quick, we're going to edit this out. Your grandfather. And Tom said the same thing. It's like, you mean it's dad? He kept saying that.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
And I said, no, it's his grandfather. He goes, oh, you mean it's whatever. Okay, all right, we'll go back. We're gonna edit that out, okay? And there is one thing I did learn that I didn't know in the past, that your grandfather was one of the people that went in and liberated Dachau.
Yeah.
And he walked in, and one of the, I guess the Jews went up to him and shook his hand and left a mark.
Yes.
On his hand.
That's right. A scar.
Because he was so thankful to
Yes.
see him that he had to the end of his life. Correct.
That's right. That's right.
And I never. And when I heard that story, that will that will resonate with me always, that
Immediately.
what it must have been for your grandfather, who comes from the Midwest, to go over there and see such evil.
Well, and years after the war, he had a little camera that he had taken on his journeys in Europe and had never developed it. And he handed me the film. This is in probably, oh gosh, it was early 2000s. I took the film and had it developed. It was Dachau prison camp. And it was people stacked like cordwood on railroad cars. It was horrific stuff. And thank God it was only black and white, because if you added color to that, you can't even imagine.
Well, okay, so let's just start off with, because you know what, your family legacy has helped you even be
Yeah.
able to be the person that you are.
That's right.
So talk about your grandfather and what that meant to you, and
Yeah.
let people know. I mean,
Well,
who was he?
I attribute much of my life to my grandfather. He was an East Grand Rapids native, born in Fort Wayne, Indiana, moved here as a very young lad. I think he was about 10 or 12 when he moved to Grand Rapids. His father worked for the railroad, and he made a great life for himself here. Was born an Episcopalian and lived next door to a really strong Catholic family and followed their values and became Catholic himself.
Your grandfather worked for Eisenhower.
Yeah,
Or he was like an
he
intelligence
was,
advisor.
Yes, he was Chief of Intelligence Branch, European Theater of Operations, United States of America.
Okay.
Or ETAUSA, as they would, the acronym would spell out ETAUSA. But he was basically Eisenhower's intelligence guy, right? He was directing spies throughout Europe during the war. And I guess I'll back up a little bit, because he was stationed prior to U.S. involvement in the war in Iceland. And he was responsible for making sure that the Germans really never reached the United States. So his team would be out in the ice fields, in the lava fields, right, of Iceland, making sure that reconnaissance planes would be taken out and that sort of thing, and ships and the shipping lanes and so forth. So they kept an eye on that. They shot down a German plane, and my grandfather recovered the code book that was in that plane. He immediately flew it to Bletchley Park, just outside of London, where, as we know from our history, the Enigma machine was decoded. Okay, so
Yes.
that code book was instrumental in helping them figure out what messages, how to, debunk or figure out what coded messages were coming across from the Germans.
Well, Churchill
and the
said
Japanese.
it was, for that, what your grandfather did. I mean, it pretty much helped them win the war.
Yes.
Because they had to decode what the Germans were saying, their correspondence.
That's right.
And it's just the little things that with war, right?
Right,
There's
that
so many
all sort of
variables.
add up. Yeah.
Yeah, it all adds up, and you wonder who's going to emerge.
That's right.
And have the opportunity to do something, and sometimes you don't
Right.
realize it might be you.
Yeah.
Right.
And he was a newspaper guy from Grand Rapids. He was an editor with the Grand Rapids Herald,
Yep.
which was, I think, the morning paper. There was a morning and evening paper. And the military in the United States did not have an intelligence division. And so they were looking for people that had sort of that same inclination, intelligence, sort of story gathering and,
Correct.
potential deception. And so they reached out to Ralph because he had prior military experience in the CCCs, Civil Conservation Corps.
Thank you.
Yeah. So they reached out to him and they said, we're going to draft you into basically the Fort Sheridan in Indiana or Illinois, and we need to really work on the image, public image of the military at the time, because we were using equipment and uniforms and so forth that was left over from World War I.
Yeah.
And so our military was really in a shambles, and we had a long way to go. So he was responsible for that. Then came the time when he was shipped up to Iceland, and then the code book. That led him to British intelligence, okay? We learned a lot from British intelligence. They shipped my grandfather up to Oxford University, where he spent time getting to understand how British intelligence worked.
And
So,
then he comes, and then to find out, that all that he has done, right? And then he comes and he brings this, and when I found this out, I'm just like, we were telling me this, I'm like, what? Because this is still around, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll jump back where jump forward, and he ends up coming. He was away from home for 5 years.
Yes.
That's the sad thing. Your grandmother had to take care of things,
Right,
like
she
she
bought a
mentioned
home,
in the
she-
interview. I saw
Yeah.
some interviews I was able to look over that you did. That she had to buy a home, which was not
Right,
something
for
a woman did.
to
So
do
his
that,
brother
yeah.
kind of stepped in and helped make sure
Yeah.
that happened. And then she had to handle the fine. I'm going to send you this money.
Yep.
Because I guess his grandparents never owned a home,
Right.
according to your interview. And then so she's like, no, we're going to pay off this home and we're going to send it.
Their youngest was disabled. I mean, can you imagine a single parent trying to
No.
figure all this out? She came from Paris, Michigan, which is just north of Big Rapids. She was
Yeah.
born and raised there, Irish Catholic family, and so much of the war, she took them back to Paris to raise the family. So
So, to be, like I said, when I learned all about your grandfather, I'm like, oh my, I go, David, I'm like, we're going to go have lunch with this guy. We're going to talk about his grandfather. Well, and we're very much interested in your life because you are part of the community. Like your grandfather was a philanthropist. He helped people in their missions and nonprofits. The Catholic Church helped grow that. And I will quickly share a story. As I have been telling people that I'm interviewing you today, they had stories to tell me because they ran into your grandfather. And your grandfather wrote them checks for going to Africa for a medical mission that they were doing with that. And he said, he said, well, how much do you need? How much do you think you're going to need for this? And they're like, well, here they are, medical. Yeah, I don't know. He goes, well, how about if I just give you $25,000 right now?
Yeah.
Your grandfather wrote a check, $25,000.
He wrote many checks like that.
And he gave back to the community, started centers, helped with the Van Andel. And, I saw pictures of him with people that really built the city.
Yeah.
There was, there were all levels, right? They're all working together. But he came back and he loved family, his faith, his country,
That's right.
right? And so he showed that in everything he did.
A true patriot.
He's a true patriot. A lot of people are out there similar. But when people say that, he really did
Yeah.
live that life.
That's what brought him joy. I mean, he spent, remarkably, he worked into his 90s. He had an office at Michael Myers, and he was a bit of a mascot for the legal team there. But he would go into the office every day up into his late 90s. He enjoyed working, and the latter part of his life, once he had amassed all of this that he had earned throughout his lifetime, he felt like, I need to give this back. He's a good Catholic, right? That's what we do. We give back to community and in either time or treasure or talents, whatever.
Right.
We give back, and he had the money to do it. So he was able. In fact, he was at the time Mercy Health, St. Mary's, and was on an overnight stay. And the president, Phil McCorkle, at the time came in, and he didn't really know my grandfather. And he said, Ralph, how are you doing? He would check in on most of the patients, and Ralph said, I'm doing great, thank you. What else can we do for you? And Ralph said, I'd like to know what I can do for you. My grandfather's father had Parkinson's, and that was a tough thing for him to watch him go through that.
Yes.
And so when Phil had said, we really need a neurological center here at this hospital, he said, let's go do it. And of course, he had the connections. It wasn't just his money that made that happen. It takes a village, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he had good friendships with, the Van Andels, DeVosses, the Meijer family. And so it was with that collective support that he was able to kick that off. And he was always very involved in everything from the construction. He would come down, he'd put the hard hat on, and he wanted to know what's going on. And every day, they said, he would come down there and just check in on the crew and see what's going on. So he wasn't somebody that was just writing checks. He was very involved in the community.
And he believed that, you have a center in in Grand Valley.
Grand Valley, yep. Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies and Cook Leadership Academy. Of
Yes, I
course,
did see that.
Peter Cook was a very good friend of his, lifetime friend, really.
There's a great foundation
Oh,
Peter
yeah.
has too.
Yep,
That gives
yep.
back to, causes. And because
Yep.
I've been part of where the foundations have given us money, and I'm just like, thank you very much.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the center really, brings attention to current politics, and we have our Common Ground initiative where we like to bring, the right and the left together to have a civil discourse conversation over today's topics.
Oh, that should be interesting. Today, it is.
Yeah.
It'd be really interesting to be sitting there.
And all these
trying-
are free events for people to participate in. They can go to the Grand Valley State University website, the Hauenstein Center, and look those up. And generally, the school year from September through May is the programming, but everybody's welcome.
Yeah,
So.
those are always fun. All right, so let's talk about you. You've been able to take this, I guess, the legacy of your grandfather, the success, all of the, skills, genes maybe, right?
Yeah.
That he had given you, and you were able to go on and do something for yourself. So share with us what you've been. I know you were in marketing. You helped Meijer. You also were did marketing for financial. For 25 years, you've done Catholic Missionary, and also you were on the board of the Mission Heroes Museum, which you shared with us.
I still
that I
am,
I've been to Frankenmuth, and I've never been there before, which is you're going to
Yeah.
share a little bit. So share a little bit about that, what you've been up to and what you've been
Yeah,
doing
well,
in
I
our
would say
community.
that, the door, and I knew this was going to happen to some degree. My grandfather and I had many conversations, Saturdays with Maury type, or was it Tuesdays with Maury?
Right.
Kind of reminds me of that because weekends we would sit down and talk together about the future and my involvement in that. And it all started almost immediately after he passed, when St. Mary's Foundation approached me and said, hey, we would really like you to be a part of our foundation moving forward. So that was in 2016, and I've been doing that ever since. And the door just continued to open through relationships. Sister Rosita Schiller, who was our grants leader at, God rest her soul, she passed earlier this year, at St. Mary's, she came back to one of our board meetings and she said, have you ever heard of the Michigan Heroes Museum? And I said, never heard of it. Where is it? She says, it's in Frankenmuth. And she says,
Frankenmuth,
I was
yeah.
there at Bronner's and I walked over to this museum. She said, it's phenomenal. They tell individual stories of heroes all across the state of Michigan, from earliest wars to current war on terror and astronauts. And I said, well, is my grandfather's story in there? And she said, no, it should be.
Correct.
And so I reached out to the executive director at the time, John Ryder, and I explained who I was, and he says, I know who you are. He says, I know all about your grandfather. He says, we've been trying to reach you to figure out how we can get his story here. And so that thus began the relationship with them. About a year later, they invited me to join their board. And we had the Heroes Next Door Veterans Day event this year at the JW Marriott, huge event to draw attention to what's going on. Even though this museum doesn't exist here in Grand Rapids, it's really important that we in West Michigan and all of those across the state support this museum, because they tell the stories of those individuals that sacrificed their life. And if it weren't for a museum like that, those trunks would be sitting full of the stories in basements across West Michigan, and maybe, who knows, at a yard sale many years later.
Okay, Brian, let's talk about how you got into senior advocacy, why you started your company, and was it because you were helping veterans and you saw that they needed help? How did this all play out?
Not necessarily. I have always had, in fact, my wife and I have always had a great joy in developing friendships with seniors. And as you mentioned, I was in retail for 25 years, found some joy in that, certainly.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I wouldn't have been there for 25 years. But I had met somebody on a flight back, I think it was from Nashville, and this gentleman was CFO for a senior living company.
Okay.
And he and I talked about it, and I thought to myself, why am I not doing that? I love the senior population. Everything he talked about, I thought, I really love that, but I didn't see myself working for a senior living community, but I didn't really know what I would like to do. And so the day came when I was introduced to a franchise by the name of Oasis Senior Advisors. And I thought, my gosh, that's just marvelous. It's free. I can provide free advice to seniors, families, and help them think through this process and make a living at doing it. I mean, what better, right?
Well, it's a free service, but then
Yeah.
you get something when you send them. So how's
That's
that
right.
work?
So we've developed literally hundreds of relationships here in West Michigan. So we really understand what services, what ancillary services, in addition to senior living communities and private duty home care, are available. So we can be that vast knowledge for anybody that is interested in reaching out to us. Okay. But we do get compensated from senior living communities when people place.
Okay.
If they decide they're going to move and they move in, they make the decision on their own. We're just helping present the best communities to meet what their needs are.
Okay.
Right? So it's a consultative process that takes about 45 minutes to an hour, and we're really learning about what sort of likes, dislikes, what health issues they have, where they want to see themselves long term, understanding their financial situation so that we don't overextend them and make sure that they can outlast their resources.
Isn't that the key?
Yeah, it is.
Does people realize well, what age would you think would be the best time, as I'm sitting there, as I'm getting older myself, thinking about when I should be sitting down with somebody like you?
Well, and it's different for everybody, Pamela, because a lot of these decisions really are determined based on what's your mobility, where are you at. I think about my grandfather. He didn't move into Porter Hills until he was around 90, and that was fine for him.
Okay.
But most people at 90, they're either gone or on their last leg, right?
Correct.
And so I would say that late 70s to early 80s is probably the best time to get into a senior living community, and not to wait until you absolutely need it. So you move in when you're independent. You move into the independent side of senior living, and then you have the full continuum of care when you need it. So you don't have to transition from this place to that place when you can, least afford to do so physically.
Did your
right?
grandfather outlive your grandmother, or who went?
He did, yeah.
He did?
She was 96. He was almost 104.
Okay.
Just 2 months shy.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
that was in is there enough services out there? We're dealing with the aging right now. It's a big population. Is there enough for? Is there good service for the middle? A lot of people are middle class.
Yeah.
They live and then you got the upper. They can just transition into like a. Is there enough service?
I would say that West Michigan is blessed. I'm part of a franchise, so I can hear stories about what's going on in New York, Chicago, major hubs, major cities across the nation on a pretty regular basis. And I would say that West Michigan is unique in the fact that we're like number 1 or number 2 in the country in philanthropy.
Yes.
And we care about our senior population. You have organizations like Senior Neighbors,
Yeah.
Reliance Community Care Partners, which is born out of the Holland Home organization, which is actually Holland Home serves more people outside of their community in services like Tandem 365, Reliance, PACE, the PACE organization.
Exactly.
It's amazing what we have here. There's always a solution for somebody. They may not like exactly what that is, but there's always a solution in market. I would say the toughest thing today is probably two things. Finding a continuous care retirement community that has availability in independent living. That's number 1.
Okay.
You have to wait 3 to 7 years to get into a place, get on a list.
Okay.
And the other side is when it comes to Medicaid waiver. Now, Medicaid waiver will pay for assisted living or a portion of assisted living. But when people have over $28.29, so $2,829, if they're $1 over, they will not get on Medicaid waiver. Now, if every community is going to charge you, if you need assistance, they're going to charge you maybe $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 on up. And so they can't afford that. If their income can't afford the, say, $3,500, how are they going to get there? And if they don't have savings, you have to be $2,000 or less in savings. Doesn't include a first home or a car, but it's tough. It can be really tough on families.
Well, and I think a lot of people, avoid that until something happens, and then realizing that
Right.
exactly what you're in this situation. Everybody's pooling in their money, trying to figure this out. You need 24-hour care. It all kind of goes kind of quickly.
Yeah.
When you're in that situation, I was in it with my dad, and was just presumed 24-hour care, and he wasn't prepared.
24-hour care at home is $20,000 plus
Right, he was not prepared.
a month.
So
$20,000 plus a month.
all of us daughters had to kick in, and we were helping, and it was, as you can imagine, you probably deal with that.
I do, because most people don't think about, when you think about your retirement fund, you're thinking about travel,
Right.
maybe some health,
Healthy years.
right? The healthy years.
You're not
But
thinking.
but your expenses really come after your healthy years.
I know.
That's when you really need to ramp up. So
right.
somebody was asking me, how much do you need when you retire for senior living? And I said, gosh, I never really thought about it, but it's, if you really want to live well, somebody my age, maybe your age, I would say a couple million.
Yes.
$1.5–2 million by the time we retire and reach that age.
All right. Well, how can they reach you to talk about, they're getting ready if they need to get ready for that senior season?
Absolutely. Easiest way, probably 616-485-7484, or really the easiest way maybe to just Google Oasis Senior Advisors. And there should be a link up there for Oasis Senior Advisors of Grand Rapids.
Oh my God. Okay.
And just click right through to our website, read all about us, and give us a call.
All right, thank you, Brian Hauenstein,
very
for
welcome.
being here today.
Thank you, Pamela.
Sharing your family legacy. It's been
My
just
pleasure.
an honor to learn about that, and I'm just would love to have you back on the show to even talk more about that, especially when we get close to that event in September, and wish you all the success. This is Pamela Keim from Grand Tap Media. We will catch you next time. Take care, everyone.